Hello, welcome. I'm so glad to have all of you joining us here, and we'll be getting this out to the whole world as we get rolling with this town hall. I'm very excited to be reaching out to you all. You can be participating here. I think there's a method for you to reach back out to us through this presentation, but also reach out to Kim or Christina or any of our sales force with further questions that we don't reach today. But I'm very thrilled to be with you. It's been an extraordinary journey over the last 6 or 7 years working with so many of you, both in the practitioner environment and the retail environment. We continue to see that health in America is an extraordinarily challenged space, and we see this disease epidemic encroaching faster and faster, unfortunately, most of all on our children. And so you guys are really literally the front line of defense for the future of our species, unfortunately. We've got a situation where we're not facing disease, we're facing extinction. And that reality is being driven home more and more clearly every day. If you haven't heard some of my recent lectures, it's really coming down to two massive pieces of public health that are kind of charting our course towards that extinction event. And the first is certainly around the chronic disease epidemic that is facing our children and adults alike. Many of you have seen our information before, and if you track back to 1975, right at the time of the debut of factory farming and the herbicides and pesticides that have become so ubiquitous in our environment, in 1975, right before Roundup, we see a rate of autism at 1 in 75. I'm sorry, 1 in 5,000 in 1975. And so 1 in 5,000 children, we see that starting to uptick in the late 80s and early 90s as we start to get glyphosate into the water table. Again, in the early 80s, we see that shift to consumer opportunity to have that product on the shelves as Roundup was approved for consumer use beyond agricultural use. And so we started getting it into our city municipal water systems, into our schoolyards, onto our playing fields and the rest. And now, as 1996 rolled by, and by 2006, we see the Roundup Ready crops that debuted in 1996 now dominating the agricultural world, not just in the United States, but globally. And so now we see this extraordinary, impact of this antibiotic-like behavior of Roundup or glyphosate. And that is now to the tune of around 4 billion pounds a year being used globally. The vast majority of that is no longer made by Monsanto, it's made by China. So Chinese off-label or generic production of that chemical has dumped that on pennies on the dollar on the marketplace. And so we have this extraordinary glut or overwhelm of this single tool to our farmers and agricultural systems globally. I have been traveling around the world in recent years with our nonprofit that I'll touch on more in a bit. But in that journey, we have seen farms across the world with dead soils that can no longer produce anything green unless enormous amount of inputs are put into that. Under our current situation of agriculture, we've lost the biology on Earth. And so as we see the chronic disease epidemic go from 1 in 5,000 children with autism to 1 in 36 currently, we also see the other chronic diseases upticking at the exact same time, 1992, 96, 2006, 2016, and then the future. And so this literal logarithmic curve that we have going on right now in chronic disease is impacting our capacity to manage a nation as we start to hit $3.5 trillion in spending now just on chronic disease management. That's 7 times larger than any other country's defense budget. Our defense budget is at around $680 billion, and so we're 5 times our own defense budget for just the amount of money we're spending on chronic disease management. We are crippling our nation in that journey. Amazingly, those children with autism at 1 in 36 are also inundated with all of the other conditions, right? Asthma, chronic allergies to foods, environmental stimulus, the incredible crushing effect of depression, anxiety disorders on these children, chronic diseases such as chronic fatigue syndrome, chronic pain syndromes. All of these things have really come out of the woodwork over just the last 20 years. We have invented diseases in this chemical agricultural environment, such as gluten sensitivity. didn't really exist in the population until 1992, when we start spraying wheat directly with Roundup as a desiccant to dry it quicker so that we can harvest it more successfully. And so in this journey, as we, once again, over and over again, continue to put this glyphosate molecule into play, we see this inundation. And so now we see 52% of children with a chronic disease by the time they're 18. That's an extraordinary burden. If you look at the entire population just back in the 1960s, before all of this broke loose, 4%, just 4% of the US population had a chronic disease. 52% of our children now with a chronic disorder or disease by the time they're 18. That generation is following suit to the rodent studies that we've done with the herbicide and pesticide toxicity specific to Roundup. And so myself and a number of colleagues were recently testifying at the EPA, showing over 96 studies from universities and private labs from around the world, showing again and again the toxicity of this glyphosate molecule to our environment and to our human biology. And that scary thing that we see in the rodent studies is the generational effects of exposure. What those studies showed is if you expose one generation to Roundup with an injection under the skin of Roundup, there's actually no visible impact on that animal. Normal lifespan, normal reproductive capacity, normal pups, and then dies at a normal life expectancy. However, if you follow that second generation born to mom who was exposed to glyphosate, that generation has metabolic collapse, obesity, diabetes, autoimmune condition. The third generation, born now to grandma who was exposed to glyphosate. Now these children are not exposed. It's all exposure through grandma, okay? And so the grandmother epigenetic pattern that's now impacting that third generation, it stillbirths and cancer at very young ages of those mice. So this generational data has been proven multiple times by multiple universities now, and this is the data we brought to the EPA, and the EPA said it is actually illegal for them to consider generational data in toxicity trials. So somewhere along the line, somebody had the foresight to push some legislation through to make it illegal for the EPA to consider generational toxicity, which is extraordinary that somebody had that foresight. It makes me think that somebody knew there was going to be an issue. Nonetheless, the scary thing is this second generation that's currently seeing this 52% hasn't even started to really show the biggest deficit or damage in the epigenetics, which will be our third generation of Roundup children that will be being born in this next decade here. And so it's a very scary thing that we may just be seeing the very tip of the iceberg of the collapse of human health due to glyphosate. This chronic disease epidemic is only half of this journey towards the extinction risk that we have as a species. And the second piece of this is fertility. We now have 1 in 3 males, not just in the United States, but in all Western nations with a sperm count less than 15 million, which is the threshold for infertility. And so 1 in 3 males with infertile levels of sperm, and the mean sperm level that we look at across that population has dropped by 50% in the last 50 years. And there's no slowing of that slope as it continues to decline. And again, not just US, all Western civilization countries. And so we've got this situation where we have infiltrated the world through technology of agriculture with a chemical that is undermining physiology at a really profound level, whether we're looking at soil biology, all the way to gut health, all the way to human biology and reproductivity. We have undermined the capacity for life with this destruction of the microbiome ultimately. And so the microbiome, if you haven't been keeping up with the data, is now linked to every chronic disease that we have going in epidemic patterns across the world right now. Damage to the microbiome is the beginning of this dysfunction. I knew that as far back as 2006, because my research happened to be in cancer research as I was developing chemotherapy. We were starting to get the first studies out of UCSF and UCSD that were telling us that the early studies in genomics of the gut microbiome were demonstrating these incredible correlations that if this specific genome or family of bacteria were missing from the gut, that person would be suddenly prone to breast cancer. If a different species was missing, prostate cancer, lung cancer. And so we had started to see these huge correlations. But my lab group at the University of Virginia, we would literally sit around joking about these studies because there was nothing in our paradigm of cancer that would allow that correlation to be actually causation. Fast forward then to 2012, when I found that the molecules sitting in a paper on soil science that we would now become ION Gut Health, that journey really connected the dots of how do the bacteria and fungi and all the rest and their presence or disappearance affect the occurrence of chronic disease. And finding those carbon snowflakes that are the active ingredient in the ION product line, we can start to put those dots together. The mechanism by which a loss of bacteria can lead to chronic disorder in the human body has to do with the communication between the cells. When you lose redox signaling, when you lose the ability to transfer electrons from one place to another within the body, you lose that kind of wireless communication network between the system, cells start to dysfunction. And the pathways that become most dysfunctional are, number one, mitochondrial. The mitochondria, of course, produce all of the energy within the cell, but they also produce the communication network within the cell that would go on to stimulate cell repair. It would go on to stimulate apoptosis or programmed cell suicide in the case of a damaged cell that can't repair itself. And so these regulatory steps towards repair or turnover and regeneration with new stem cell activity is regulated by that mitochondrial environment, but dictated by this bacterial communication network. And so as we start to study deeper and deeper the effects of this communication network, the carbon molecules made by bacteria and fungi in the soils of the agricultural space or the soils of your gut, as they start to become deficient, each species making its own variants of those carbon molecules, you can suddenly lose an important pathway for communication in one organ system or another. So what we're seeing again and again is as the microbiome collapses, communication drops, vulnerability occurs. That vulnerability, if you guys have been following a lot of our science here at the Biome Sciences over the last decade or so here, is that we are showing that glyphosate not only is acting as an antibiotic in the soils and in our gut, it's also directly damaging the protein structures within our body. The main proteins that we've been studying over the years has been around the tight junctions, those Velcro-like molecules that keep the gut, but also the vascular system, the blood-brain barrier connected with that vascular system, and the kidney tubules, also part of that vascular system, all dependent on tight junction or Velcro structure integrity. As glyphosate sweeps in, damages the gut wall, we've been able to show in vitro that if you damage the gut and grow the blood-brain barrier right on top of it or right adjacent to it, the blood-brain barrier is damaged actually not directly by the glyphosate or the gluten, it's damaged directly by the injury response of the gut lining that then opens up the brain. And so we have this cascade of openings that happen after the glyphosate hits the gut wall. If you put gluten and glyphosate together, you get this synergistic behavior. And so we see that gluten sensitivity phenomenon where most of the symptoms of gluten sensitivity, of course, are not gut related. They're actually brain related. Brain fog, lack of poor sleep quality, poor sex drive. All of these things are coming out of that second injury that's happening at the blood-brain barrier. And so we see this kind of cascade of events happen. And of course, if we look at the kidneys, we can find that the population is responding with kidney disease across the world. Chronic kidney disease is now the #1 chronic disease worldwide and is contributing to the leading cause of death in the vast majority of chronic disease globally. If we look down into the animal kingdom, where we see very high exposures to glyphosate, 10x or 100x higher levels of Roundup and glyphosate residues in the animal food than we have in our human agricultural system, we get to see that #1 cause of death is kidneys, especially in the cats. And in dogs, it's the cancer now. Extraordinarily, we're seeing 1 case of cancer in every 1.6 dogs. And so, at less than 1 in 2 is now the penetration of cancer in our dogs. And that's new since 2014. So there's this massive increase in cancer in the dogs, kidney failure in the cats. And we see the same physiology underlying both of those. And so in this journey towards chronic disease epidemic, we are starting to have to come to terms with the fact that it may be the reality that we have to really start to reshape biology at the planetary level if we're going to reach some sort of biologic success at the human level. And so that has been our journey at ION Biome. We are now working to really produce a series of products now, not just the gut health, but bringing the sinus health that many of you are aware of and you're using widely in your clinics and stores. You're now seeing the opportunity for us to continue that journey into total body support through the intelligence of nature here. we are now channeling all of the revenue that goes into that company back out into R&D for other companies that will have impact around this greater agriculture and technology space that is contributing to the poisoning of the planet. And so your cooperative effort with us here on ION Biome is allowing us to mobilize resources in the for-profit realm to generate new companies that will inspire better use of regenerative use of plastics instead of dumping them into our oceans ultimately. And we are now have started the nonprofit Farmers Footprint. If you're not familiar, farmersfootprint.us, take a look. We are bringing an incredible nonprofit online over the last 2 years that is really impacting the global awareness of the need for regenerative farming as an alternative to the global chemical agriculture scene that has developed. And so it's with great joy that we get to have impact not just on the acute management of the crisis that humanity is in, but really getting to the root cause of the situation, which is literally down in the soils and the root systems of our plants. As we've been working with these farmers, it's been extraordinary to find out that the farming industry, the chemical agricultural scene, is recognizing that if we continue the track on chemical ag, we will only have 60 harvests left on the planet. That was a goosebump moment when I first heard that from the farmers, because I had been touring the world banging the drum saying we are heading for literal extinction as humanity in 70 years. And when I heard 60 years harvest, it just rang so true of like, the reality is not we have a human crisis. The reality is we have a biology crisis on the planet. And we aren't going to see just the death of humans. We're going to see the death of biological life on the planet. And it's not the first time it's happened. Interestingly, this is the 6th time on this planet that we have a fossil record of a great extinction event. And these great extinction events can be anywhere from 85% to 95%, and one extinction within those estimated 98% loss of life on the planet. And we learned that in each of those instances, it was a collapse of soil and water systems that led to those great extinction events. The last one, 55 million years ago, was famous for wiping out the dinosaurs, but it turns out that some 87-90% of life was lost with that great extinction. And it was mapped back in the geologic record to an asteroid or a huge volcanic event that left a huge layer of dust across the entire surface of the Earth, choking out the topsoil, which then led to a shift in water health as the CO2 levels, when they can't be breathed in by the soil, starts to be breathed in by the water. And with that acidification of the oceans that happens with that CO2 shift from soil deposition into water deposition, we see that mass extinction event happen. And it's interesting that we're killing her topsoils again, this time not by some geologic or astrologic event, but by human behavior this time. And so in our short 200,000 years on this planet, we've been marching towards this capacity as a species to destroy the entire topsoil system of the world. Currently, it's estimated that 95 to 97% of agricultural soils across the world are now depleted or severely depleted. And the consequences are obvious. If you take a look at Australia right now, the biggest fire event in history, we are seeing that being driven by a lack of water content within the soils and the extreme dry weather that's there. We know that that was created by a destruction of the soils, because that desertification, where we create deserts where there had been, volatile life before, begins at the topsoil level again. And when we kill the microbiome of the topsoil, we lose water retention capacity of soil. We get silting and runoff, and we get wind blowing off that topsoil, and the earth can no longer breathe. And when you cannot breathe, one of the things you're not breathing in is not just the CO2 and the methane, you're actually not breathing in the water. The ion and water content from the atmosphere can't get back into the soils. When it rains, the water can't penetrate and hold in the soil. Instead, it runs off into the rivers, oceans, carrying with it even more topsoil. So we're in a vicious cycle of destruction of soils across the world, resulting in the massive ecologic disasters that are happening around the world. The typhoons and hurricanes that are accelerating are because of these extreme weather shifts due to an inability of the soils to breathe. When I go into the hospital systems, and I was just down in Houston this past year at MD Anderson, and it's the largest cancer center in the world. And MD Anderson Texas Children's Hospital is the largest children's hospital I've ever imagined. It's tower after tower after tower of children's hospital. And it's devastating to walk through those halls for hours and hours and see children, coursing through the hallways with their chemotherapy poles, bald-headed, big smiles, and they're full of the joy you would expect in a 3-year-old or a 6-year-old, but their joy is perhaps harnessed to this chemotherapy pole in a way that we don't even fully appreciate. It's that chemotherapy pole is a symptom of a deeper collapse of our understanding of our right for health, our children's right to their health, and their health is their right to a connection to Mother Nature. And so what we are doing at ION Biome, what you guys are doing every day when you are in the aisles or in your clinics, you are literally the front line of hope for so many of your clients. Those clients are desperately looking for answers that they're not getting from us as Western medicine doctors. We are so eager as doctors to bring another pharmaceutical, toolbox into the mix, but nothing in the pharmaceutical industry can bring somebody closer to nature. In fact, it always brings it further away. I can tell you from my chemotherapy development stage of life that what we do as chemists and as research scientists is we perturb natural compounds. We bend molecules, we flip molecules, we recombine molecules to create nature compounds that can then be patented and then put into the disease management pipeline. What we are doing is perturbing nature to create poisons, and we are trying to poison some specific pathway. Even something as benign as a blood pressure medicine is poisoning a massive neurologic pathway that regulates the tension of a blood vessel. And so from the most benign to the most obvious poisons in the chemotherapy world, we are literally trying to create non-natural compounds to poison natural pathways. And so each pharmaceutical that we add on is taking that human further away from their intrinsic nature for health and healing. We are recognizing that the functional medicine movement that's happened, this integrative philosophy around medicine that kicked the allopathic mindset off, may have gotten right on the same stool again. As functional medicine doctors, we have had a tendency to then get on the same stool and go and prescribe the same kind of mindset of kind of heavy doses of supplements, minerals, vitamins, and whatever it is, or even more injurious as an endocrinologist, it can tell you would be the hormone replacement phenomenon that we've seen. HRT, we've known for many decades, is undermining normal biology. Normal biology is a reduction in growth factors midway through life. And if we keep giving back those growth factors, we're going to accelerate chronic disease, especially in the setting of the toxicity that we have on the planet right now. And so we continue to throw these toolboxes of non-natural journeys to our patients in an effort. ION was a big shift for me. When we found this truth in nature, when we found that nature had a methodology for coordinating repair and regeneration within the human body without doing anything. It's simply reconnecting cells and their communication network to do the repair. Many of you have seen, and we'll send out PowerPoints or whatever you need to share this with your community, but that PowerPoint image that we've shown over and over again over the years of the tight junctions falling apart under glyphosate and then lacing themselves right back together again with the communication network back in place, that's not ION that's invigorating that repair process. That's the human cells realizing their potential for repair and their need for repair. And so that intrinsic health that is inherent to every single cell within your body is coordinated amazingly by the microbiome. And I find that to be brilliant engineering. We were literally engineered to fall apart if we were to distance ourselves too much from the intelligence of nature in her biodiversity that's represented most of all through the microbiome. So if we go into isolation as a species, if we kill out the microbiome with our herbicides, pesticides, or our antibiotics that we prescribe as physician, antifungals, terrifying. There's 5 million species of fungi. And yet we think Candida is like this big enemy and all that. Candida is a symptom of collapse of the microbiome on the bacteria side. And so the yeast and the fungi have to step in to try to reestablish the soil, if you will, of the human terrain. Bacteria can then come back in, but we won't even let that. We hit it with an antibiotic. The Candida comes in to try to do damage control. We hit that with an antifungal. You can start to see that we are just leaving bare the soil. And when the bare soil is there, the only thing that can crop up are the aggressive weeds, which might be MRSA or VRE or any of these, multi-drug resistant bacteria that can pop up like weeds in that devastated terrain. the way back is going to be through biodiversity. And it's very cool that once a communication network made by the microbiome is put back into the gut, we see an immediate expansion of the bowel movement volume. And so the stool volume will pick up in those first days and weeks as you and your clients get this ION biome consistently in there. And that ion communication network is stimulating not just human cell regeneration, but diversification and multiplication of the existing bacteria and the new bacteria that can come in through contact with nature. Remember, ION is a sterile product, much different than a probiotic. The probiotic industry has been limiting our capacity for biodiversification since its debut 30 years ago. Probiotic industry is, this stepwise belief that there are good bacteria, and that was an important, leap for us to do. And so the probiotic industry, I think, was our necessary step towards understanding that the terrain of the gut or the microbiome was an important foundation for health. Unfortunately, when we are giving 3 species or 7 species of bacteria day in and day out at billions of copies in each of those capsules, we end up with monoculture within the gut. This was proven in a couple of incredible studies that were done and published in Cell in 2018. And in that study, after 2 weeks of exposure to antibiotics in rodents and in humans, we saw an 80% loss of microbial diversity. If those individuals were then put on a probiotic, their recovery was frozen. The probiotic had the same suppressive capacity as the 2 weeks of antibiotics in that microbiome effect. And it took months to see improvement in the humans. Even at 6 months, those humans on a probiotic had not recovered to their baseline. Amazingly, if they had been put on a placebo, they had recovered in 30 days. The message is nature is able to repopulate our biodiversity. We're supposed to have over 30,000 species of bacteria, and 3 species in your probiotic, or 7 species, or 25 species, whatever you want to, put on there. We realize it's just a very tiny incremental step back towards biodiversity from that. And so, if probiotics are in the mix, we recommend that you space them out, give the microbiome chance to repopulate from the air that the individual's breathing, from their food system, especially wild fermented foods being a great example of a great tool there. But the probiotic used chronically will create that monoculture event and suppress biodiversity. We know now, without a question, that human health begins with microbiome diversity, not the amount of bacteria, but the sheer number of species and breadth. And so that's what the probiotic industry has not been able to deliver to us. And so if you're going to give a probiotic, space it out, give space. And what we find is if we put ION Biome into that mix, whether at the sinuses or in the gut, we see this explosive capacity for balance to come back into the terrain of that ecosystem. Not because there's bacteria in ION, but because there's bacteria in the ecosystem around us that, when given back that communication network and that important compost-like carbon substrate, each species can find its call. Imagine each species putting out these carbon snowflakes, each specific to the species, 10 or 15 variants specific to that species, some to coordinate repair in some organ system, some to coordinate the replication of their own and the reinforcement of their own species, and some to communicate with other species and understand their synergistic behavior with the other species. And so this communication network made by the microbiome is really there to coordinate biodiversification. We find that ION gut health works much better if we do not inundate with probiotic daily. So we try to get all of our patients off of probiotic. If you're going to be on one, then certainly do it intermittent. Once a week, twice a week at the most. You want to just back that space in so that the microbiome can repopulate that patient. Get that patient outside is a critical piece. And so we preach nature, 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 nature in our clinic. And so I go very aggressive with this. I'll make people drive down to the Great Smokies in the middle of the East Coast down there in Tennessee and all that. Great Smokies is the oldest ecosystem on the planet, older than even the rainforests of Brazil and the like. And so find that ancient ecosystem near you. We are very blessed in the United States with an extraordinary array of national parks that are severely underutilized by our population. But it doesn't have to be even a national park. Just get outside on a local hike, go to the local stream, get your feet in the water, touch real soil. When you go gardening, take off the gloves, take off your big work boots, and just stand there for a moment at the end of your workday in gratitude to Mother Earth that you've just been in contact with, that's giving you this bounty of food out of the garden, perhaps. Get back in touch with that real realistic microbiome experience where you are not tapping into, some theoretical, you're literally tapping into the soil from which biology happens. So let's work on getting all of our clients outside and inundated with the biodiversity that our biology is begging for. I want to bring you some new science today. Today is very exciting for me because we're starting to crack the code and get this opening of the door, or in the window perhaps, to see in deeper. How is this carbon-based molecular system really bringing about this extraordinary healing event? How is it possible that the human cells know how to heal, know how to change the protein structure, know how to increase protein synthesis to repair that tight junction system when an injury happens? What is that intelligent, awareness of the human cell that's invigorated by that microbial communication, and how does it go about such a complex array of functions? Huge answer has come through our double-blind, placebo-controlled human study that completed recently, and we're still diving deep into all of the data, but some of the initial data that's come out that really is giving us a window onto how the body responds to the microbiome explosion around ION gut health is through this compound called lysine. As you know, there's 22 amino acids in the human body. Some people say 23, depends on how you categorize one of those amino acids. But the amino acids at 21 or 22, 23 amino acid variations are like Legos, or like letters in the alphabet. From each of those combinations of the letters or Legos, you can build millions of different variants of not just 280,000 proteins, but then the folding of those proteins into different shapes and functions. And so this extraordinary kind of building block environment of the amino acids is how we make proteins of any sort in the human body. Of those amino acids, of those 22 or 23 variants, we have the essential amino acids. These 9 essential amino acids cannot be made by the human system. Our cells do not have the capacity, the enzyme pathways, to produce these essential amino acids. And so we're fully dependent on the microbiome and the plant life around us in our food and otherwise to supply the essential amino acids, 9 of the 22. And so that's an extraordinary, you're pushing almost half of those amino acids that would build our protein system can't be obtained through human biology, have to be in connection to the biodiversity and the function of the plant life and microbial life around us. One of those is lysine. And what we showed in this double-blind placebo-controlled trial, we'll send out the PowerPoint to show you just the massive impact here, was that we could double lysine in the urine of healthy subjects after just 2 weeks of ION gut health. And so they were randomized to placebo or the typical usage of ION Biome, and within that 2-week period, we see this doubling of lysine. Why is that significant? It's because lysine plays an extraordinarily critical effect on protein synthesis. And so it's very critical not just to build the proteins that lysine is important to, but it actually stabilizes protein synthesis of proteins that don't even contain lysine. And so you could picture it almost as an insulator. It's interacting with proteins as they are produced off of a messenger RNA that's come from your DNA strand in the nucleus out into the cytoplasm, is now building a complex protein by lacing together all these amino acids and allowing that to fold in that complex 3-dimensional structure, which might become an enzyme, might become a tight junction, might become all kinds of different structural proteins or functional proteins. That relies on lysine to get that complex 3-dimensional folding and that coordinated effect coming off the messenger RNA. So lysine, critical in protein synthesis. And so when we see tight junctions suddenly start expressing themselves in the face of the ION gut health, we know that that tight junction protein synthesis is being regulated and supported by lysine as it increases. The second major role of lysine is around the actual epigenetic modification. So epigenetics is how the environment informs your genome as to what to make. And this again makes a lot of sense. You sweep in with an injury like gluten or glyphosate, we show the tight junctions fall apart, give back the communication network, and one of the first responses is lysine stimulation. Lysine in its regulation or elevation will then support that epigenetic patterning or the epigenetic response to that environmental injury. And so through the genomics and through the protein synthesis proteomics, we see support at both of those levels with the lysine. Furthermore, we know that lysine has an extraordinary ability to balance viral and bacterial communication. And so it seems to be linked to the overgrowth of viruses, such as the herpes viruses and the like, that are out there. And so as lysine becomes deficient, we can become prone to imbalance between the viral kingdom and the bacterial kingdom. Remember, the viruses and the parasites are just as important and are far more numerous than the fungi or the bacteria. And so we have to come to terms with the fact, as physicians and scientists and health educators as general class, we need to come to terms with the fact that the microbiome is not against us. The microbiome is trying to create the balanced terrain for biology to happen, plant life to happen, human health to happen, cats, dogs, whatever animal you're working with. This world of biology is dependent on this life spring of information. With the life spring of information, we see upregulation of lysine in these human patients. Where's that coming from? This is one of my favorite things about this new data, is again how dependent and kind of intercalated we are into the science of the microbiome, into the production and health of the microbiome. Remember, in these human subjects, after 2 weeks, they double their amounts of lysine. And this is, you can read the white paper that's coming out around this in the next week here, but that white paper is going to take you through the way in which we looked across other amino acids and through the metabolic pathways to the precursors and the breakdown products of lysine to show that it is very specific to lysine. Lysine is responding preferentially than other amino acid pathways to increase. And so after 2 weeks, these people in the double-blind placebo-controlled trial see that doubling. But remember, their body cannot make lysine. And so where's that coming from? The answer lies within the microbiome, because again, these essential amino acids are made by bacteria, fungi, and plants, not by the human. Interestingly, their diet didn't change over the course of this study. And so the study was designed to follow them on their current American omnivore diets. And so no change in diet, meaning no change in the plant life coming in. And so really we're looking to see if there's a shift in the microbiome that would then lead to this expansion of the microbiome's capacity to make lysine and support amino acid, protein synthesis, and genomics epigenetic response. And that's exactly what we saw, pointing to the expansion and improved productivity of lysine across that. Interestingly, as you get the white paper, we also will detail out how this study and the subsequent kind of mass spec analysis of the urine is showing us that we're also improving gut absorption of that lysine. So the trafficking of lysine into the body once it's produced by that is seemingly increased as well, which makes a lot of sense when you see that repair-like mechanism of the human cells repairing one another in response to this increase in the microbiome signaling, increase in lysine. The human cell realizes there's been damage, that inherent healing capacity rushes in, makes new proteins, laces that all together. You can imagine how much better a gut that's intelligently connected is going to absorb all kinds of nutrients from lysine on down to the other amino acids. But as we looked across the amino cascade, while there are improvements in a number of them, the most significant one is lysine. And so I'm very excited by this potential that lysine is kind of this regulating key step towards the recovery of normal biology at the protein level, at the genomics level, and beyond. So this is a little bit of this new science that we can't wait to get into your hands, to get this into palatable fashion so that you can help your clients understand what is the role of ION Biome. It's to begin to rebuild the soils of your gut. It's to start to rebuild the soils of the sinuses with ION Sinus. Why is the sinuses so important? I don't know if I've had a chance to speak to you directly yet about the sinus-gut connection. But in my clinic, we're increasingly seeing over the 2010 to 2015 range, more and more patients showing up with symptoms of small bowel overgrowth, which kind of presents a lot like irritable bowel syndrome, lots of bloating after meals, indigestion, along with diarrhea and constipation patterns, and increased inflammation, and poor response to dietary changes and the rest. As we continue to work with that population with ION Gut Health, we realized that we were kind of chasing the wind if we couldn't fix this up here, because all night long, and once we get sinus inflammation and sinus congestion, we get postnasal drainage, and that postnasal drainage is the result of an unbalanced microecosystem and microbiome within the sinuses. And so you get the same result of leaky gut you could see at the sinuses. And so the result that we're breathing 75% of our air with Roundup, it's raining 75% of our rain was contaminated with Roundup. And so as our lungs and our sinuses are is equally injured as our gut, we have to come to terms with the fact that we need to start the journey into the gut up here in the sinuses and nasal cavity. And so what do? Again, ION Scientist does nothing on its own. It's not there to repair anything. It's not to do anything but to support the terrain of the microbiome. As the terrain of the microbiome is supported, we see the same cascades that we would with the gut health, with that restoration of the intrinsic human capacity for regulation and biologic regeneration. I am so thrilled to be using a tool all the time in clinic that doesn't do anything to my patients. It instead inspiring in my patients their capacity for optimal health. That journey into optimal health is really what I'm most excited about seeing in your client population. We have to fundamentally change human connection to Mother Nature. The intelligence of nature as a brand that many of you have seen us in the transition of has a much deeper and bigger message for you to bring than our previous brand of Restore. The concern that we had around Restore was many, and there was legal reasons, there was international trademark reasons, lots of kind of seemingly meaningless business reasons for it. But the deeper truth is that our company is starting to uncover truths around sun, around skin function in the face of sun or other insults, where we're looking at longevity of skin cells, of brain cells, of vascular cells, all the way down, understanding that longevity is the secret to this regenerative process. And in this case, it's not just longevity of the human, it's longevity of the human cell systems as they plug their resource centers, their root systems back into nature through the ion connection. And so we're going to be rolling out a product line over the next 24 months that's going to support literally every space within the body that you can think of. And so we're very excited for you to start this journey with us with this new brand of ION that's going to support this bigger and deeper message that the whole body is a microbiome terrain. Every organ system, we now know that the breast, the prostate, the lung, even the brain has its own microbiome integrated with it. Isn't it extraordinary that our brain has relationship to fungi such that when we get something like an Alzheimer's injury, the fungi will go into a mycelial spread and will bloom like a mycelial network around the damaged neurons of an Alzheimer's brain and bring nutrients in and produce some basic metabolic supply and communication ultimately back to this damaged area of the brain. Same thing in breast cancer. As a woman transitions from inflammation in the breast to a true cancer process, we see a shift in the microbiome from Sphingomonas to a mycobacteria. And that switch from Sphingomonas to mycobacteria is a signal that the terrain is now so lacking oxygen that Sphingomonas can't be present, and we need an anaerobic or anoxic kind of environment to be populated by a different bacterial species. When that was first recognized in 2014, that all of the breast tumor studies were all showing up with all this mycobacteria in there, the thought was, oh, well, maybe that mycoplasma radiotolerans is the species. Maybe that is an infectious disease causing cancer, and the loss of Sphingomonas is the early harbinger of cancer. Well, in fact, they found the opposite, that the women who had the least amount of the mycoplasma radiotolerance were the most likely to pass away from their cancer from metastatic disease, meaning the more sterile the cancer, the more likely to die. The more mycobacteria, mycoplasma present, the more likely the woman was to survive that cancer. So each response from the microbiome, whether in the brain of an Alzheimer's patient or the breast of a breast cancer patient, we find that the terrain is trying to adjust, trying to reestablish a complex microbial and life-generating ecosystem for that individual. And so it's a very humbling journey as a human physician to realize that my care of my patients is going to be limited to my capacity to understand them as a complex ecosystem. And if every day in clinic, I'm not addressing their general ecosystem, which is their connection with nature, but also to humanity itself, it's a very important message that you bring to your clients that the isolation that causes disease as we isolate from the microbiome is just as potent when we isolate from other humans. And so each of you, whether you're in the hallways of a clinic or in your exam rooms or in the aisles of your natural health stores and groceries, you guys are the front line, not just of human health, but human connection. Anybody could be out there shopping on Amazon or doing whatever they do to electronically get resources into their home. If somebody's showing up in your office, in your aisle, It's because they need the human hand, they need the human mind to be part of their journey. Your journey has never been more important. You all who are standing in those aisles, you all who are in the clinics with your patients, you guys are perhaps the last semblance of that human connection, and that human connection will bring this broader message of nature is super intelligent, and we were with her for a period of time as humans in our brief 200,000 year history. We had this opportunity to connect with her, and through indigenous cultures and indigenous practices, whether farming or spiritual practices or medicine itself, there was always nature within it. Nature was the template for it until that 1950s, 1960s, that post-World War II era, where we decided both medicine and farming needed to be chemicalized. We needed to invent new molecules, separate ourselves from nature, control nature with these tools. That was our demise, and not just of a species, but of a planet. And so we need to step back from that chemical separation. We need to step back into relationship. And so I honor you, each of you, for your effort towards relationship. You all are trusted resources within your community. And I'm just so grateful for the partnership that you guys have had with us, that you've listened, that you've learned new science, learned a new category of health support. We are very excited to bring a whole pipeline to you and your clients now, so that we can invigorate a deeper reconnection to nature, so that as a species, we can change direction. It's critical that we do this. We are going to see the third generation of children under the Roundup era born in these next 5 and 10 years. We need to be very diligent in our approach to resolving that injury at a fundamental epigenetic level. And for that reason, this new science around lysine is exciting. We can modify the epigenetic journey towards extinction. We can modify it by getting these protective compounds made by the microbiome and the plants for the protection of human life. I'm humbled by that. Why would the microbiome and the plant life of this planet that we have been so violent towards continue to reach out with solutions and an opportunity of grace for us to grasp that and move into that journey? I'm going to bring us back right now to the bigger pursuit that we're on now as a company, is that we now know that we cannot produce enough supplements for the whole world. You guys, as you get this out to your clients, are starting to affect that 100th monkey kind of phenomenon. If we can get 6% of the population to realize the science around this product line, even just a fraction of those perhaps, actually getting exposure to the product and having the transformational capacity that the product brings, just a small fraction is needed to start to change the entire behavior of the species. And so we can't produce enough for the world, but the science and the information can change agriculture as a fundamental, and alongside of that, change medicine as a fundamental disconnect from nature's normal patterns of regeneration and potential. As we look at soil extracts, the last closing science that I want to share with you is the difference between other soil extracts and ION, because it's really, again, demonstrating something of how biology happens. And there's perhaps a deeper truth here for us again. But the journey that we had into stabilizing those carbon molecules that would become ion, our journey there went through a whole history of many hundreds of years of efforts to extract compounds from soil for mineral supplementation to humans. It's as far back as shilajit, which is a dense mineral compound, looks like white chalk, developed in India and is used widely throughout that area of the world, China and the rest, and then and that probably thousands of years old. And then the extraction of humic acids, which are very large substrates of carbon and mineral compounds, and then the later extraction of fulvic acids, which are tinier mixes of carbon and mineral substrates that are extracted from that larger humate or humic acid populations. All of those have held great hope for restoring health and changing soil dynamics, changing gut biology and all of that, but it was always limited by the fact that it's very oxidative. Oxidation is the process of rusting, and so when water hits steel, you can see it tear electrons off of the surface of the steel through the process that we call rust. And so that destruction of the steel is the ripping of electrons off the surface by the water itself. That same process happens at kidney tubules, vascular wall, gut wall, etc., when we put fulvic acid onto the membranes. The canary in the coal mine of the body is definitely the proximal kidney tubule. that kidney cell that is responsible for trafficking water and electrolytes and helping start that detox process of the human body is critical for human biology, but it also happens to be the most sensitive cell to toxicity that we have in biologic studies. And so with our early efforts, we were using proximal renal tubules in our initial safety studies before we put this into my patients in 2012, 13. And in that journey, we were starting to see that we had the opportunity to bring my experience in redox chemistry into this world of carbon microbial intelligence and communication. And so with the buffering of electrons and hydrogen onto those compounds that have been extracted in Shilajit down to fulvic acids, we were able to actually improve not only the toxicity profile to neutralize toxicity, we were actually able to trigger a longevity event. And so you'll see the slide as we distribute the science to you. But what we can see is that control, the yellow bar on the graph that you'll see, you have proximal renal tubules growing in a stable and healthy environment in a petri dish. As soon as you add fulvic acids, you see a drop in the longevity of those cells. And it can drop as much by 50% to 15% declines in life expectancy for those cell populations. And we're inducing suicide in those cells through apoptosis by that exposure to that oxidative injury of fulvic acids. Once we get it through the buffering system and the process that turns the product into ion, then we get this extraordinary opposite effect, where not only is there no oxidative damage, we actually see an extension of life of those proximal renal tubules as big as 15% improvements in the life expectancy of those cells. That has never been witnessed since 1969. 1969 is when we kind of optimized proximal renal tubule biology in a petri dish, and our lead scientist, Dr. John Gilday, out of the University of Virginia, formerly at Johns Hopkins, was the one to really write the book. Quite literally, he's written a book on how to optimize proximal renal tubule biology. And so it was when we brought him this dirt water, he was pretty blown away by his optimized proximal renal tubule cell population, living 15% longer than he had ever witnessed, and seeing optimization of that function when we brought in not human biology and support to it, but actually microbial biodiverse communication, and put that into the human system, and we see biology on a level we had never witnessed in a petri dish. And I'm very excited to say that about every disease process out there, whether we're talking about cancer, heart disease, or the rest. We've come to understand those diseases out of the basic science done in petri dishes that are done in sterile environments. And so we have not even touched our understanding as a science and physician community the real potential for human health and regeneration, because we've been thinking we are an isolated species. When we start to think more broadly that we are a connected species that came not out of some isolated human event, but actually came out of the soils of the earth in so many ways. And in our journey towards human biology on this planet, we found the benefit of microbial diversity, soil health, plant diversity, plant medicine, all of that stuff supporting the potential for large organisms like ourselves to thrive on this planet. And so it's with extraordinary humility that I think we are going to continue to see that at every level. It's going to be the soil that once we get it buffered back into its intelligence and able to exchange electrons, we see information systems restored. The lesson that we see in this march from fulvic acids to ion today is that the secret was in the electron transfer, which is a cool story because it gets at the real essence of what it means to be human. Ultimately, we are not biologic animals. We are actually atomic physics events. Every molecule is made of atoms, and atoms are these ethereal building blocks, much like the amino acids for the proteins. The atoms and that complex periodic chart are the fabric by which we are knit together. Because we are atomic forces, not biologic forces at our fabric level, we get into the reality that we actually are only here by the trafficking of light energy. Light energy is measured by the electromagnetic field. Light energy in the electromagnetic field is in two different possibilities, right? It can be in light frequency and vibration, or it can be in a particle state. And what we see again and again is that the human experience, here we are solid in a particle state, is an expression of the light energy beneath us. And so we are a light energy. We are a light species. We are a light being that is having a particle moment. And we can actually prove this by getting electrons to transport through the system. And as soon as we start to get that electron flow, making it, go from a fulvic human kind of experience to this ion charged experience of electron transfer, we see the whole system turn into this liquid circuit board, information transferred, not at the biology level yet, but at the electrical level, which is what we call redox chemistry. And it functions very similar to a liquid circuit board, a circuit board that's passing electrons through switches of on-off switches to channel information to and fro within these complex systems, much like the complex computer within your cell phone. And one of the first systems that's repaired as those tight junctions go back together, sitting right behind the tight junction is the gap junction. And the gap junction is made up of thousands and thousands of tiny little tubules that are many times the fraction of a human hair, that are perfect tubes, that at the end of each one is a light aperture. It looks like the aperture on a camera lens. And so the electron microscopy is truly spectacular to find out that each human cell is connected by these tubes that channel cytoplasmic information, the electromagnetic field or light transfer of information from one cytoplasm to the next. We are light beings in the end. And our journey from the soil to soil extracts into active electron transfer and ion, we start to get the reality that we are light beings having a particle moment. When we chemicalize that, when we contaminate it through the herbicide and pesticide environment, we collapse biologically. We kill the microbiome through the antibiotic effect of the herbicides. We then become vulnerable as those populations go away. We turn into a leaky sieve at the gut, at the vascular system, the blood-brain barrier, and the kidney tubules. We bring back electron transfer and communication through the redox system. The lights go back on. We literally have added something to the food and water systems of the planet, a planet that is a water cycle. 70% of our planet is covered in water. 70% of our bodies are made of water. 70% of the plants we eat are water. We are a water biology on this planet, and we have contaminated that water with a molecule that disrupts the light of our bodies. It breaks the gap junctions just as the tight junctions, turns the lights off, and that is why we see chronic disease exploding, is because we cannot see the health for the darkness that's around us. And so I'm amazed by this journey into the light, if you will, that ION has taken our science team, and we are ultimately very grateful to you guys for being such an integral part of our team, because knowing all of this in a science lab actually creates a sense of hopelessness if we don't see it catching traction out in the public. So we thank you for getting information to every hand that you touch to say, we are scratching the potential of human behavior and human biology. We could become a much higher consciousness, a lighter state of being, if we would turn the lights back on, and at a rate that's probably never been seen before. Remember, we've never seen kidney tubules function as they do when enlightened by communication network, not of the soils of today, but the soils of 60 million years ago that predated that last great extinction, the last great collapse of the soil systems. When we go back that far into the potential of planet Earth's biology and inform the human system for the first time through that mechanism, we get to see this explosion of life happen. Regeneration is part of human biology. It needs to be supported and invigorated. ION is that path for you and your clients, and we're so grateful to have you aboard. Look forward to taking questions through Kim and Christina and the like as we go forward. Please reach out to us as questions continue to arise. We'll be getting you in coming days white papers on the new lysine data, as well as continued support from our science team as we continue to untangle the beauty that is in human biology as it is connected to that intelligence of nature. Thank you for your attention today. We're looking forward to the opportunity to continue that relationship and conversation with you.